The rise of the red pill, the sexual revolution and its consequences. Beginning in the latter half of the 20th century, human mating and reproductive patterns began to shift rapidly. Long-standing norms that had remained relatively stable for thousands of years were disrupted within a single generation. Several forces contributed to this change. The widespread availability of birth control, liberalized divorce laws, and the transition to a post-industrial economy enabled women to support themselves independently of men. Together, these developments fundamentally altered how relationships, sex, and family formation operate. These changes coincided with improvements in life expectancy and overall quality of life. In many respects, they expanded personal freedom and opportunity. However, they also introduced new complications into the mating landscape. While often framed as a clear advancement, the effects of the sexual revolution were not uniformly positive for either sex. New freedoms came with new trade-offs, particularly in how attraction, commitment, and long-term pairing function. What matters most is this: the conditions created by these changes are not temporary. They are not reverting to earlier models. Men must operate within the reality that exists, not the one they might prefer. Understanding the environment as it is, without denial or nostalgia, is the foundation of the red pill perspective. The effects of feminism on modern mating. What began as a movement focused on financial, legal, and social equality gradually evolved into something broader. By the late 20th century, particularly during the third wave, feminism increasingly positioned itself in opposition to traditional male roles and institutions. As cultural norms shifted, long-standing models of marriage, family formation, and gender cooperation were openly challenged. Commitment, child-rearing, and long-term partnership were often reframed as optional or restrictive, rather than foundational. During this period, divorce rates rose sharply, and relationship stability declined. Hypergamous selection became easier to pursue in an environment with fewer social or legal constraints. These changes reshaped sexual dynamics as well. While female sexual exploration was widely encouraged, male sexuality was increasingly portrayed as problematic or dangerous. Common male drives were frequently interpreted through the lens of power imbalance or cultural pathology. This asymmetry created confusion and defensiveness rather than cooperation between the sexes. In response, many men began to disengage. Traditional incentives to commit weakened. Marriage was delayed or avoided altogether. Social withdrawal increased, and long-term investment became less attractive under uncertain conditions. At the same time, many women postponed dating, partnership, and childbearing in favor of career development and personal autonomy. For some, this strategy produced unintended outcomes. By the time readiness for long-term partnership returned, the pool of desirable and willing men had narrowed. The result was not a clear victory for either side, but a restructuring of incentives. Modern mating became less stable, more transactional, and increasingly misaligned with long-term reproductive and relational goals. Understanding these effects requires setting aside ideology and examining outcomes. The landscape has changed, and navigating it successfully requires clarity rather than sentiment. Rape culture as a cultural framework. One of the most influential narratives to emerge from third-wave feminism was the concept of rape culture. This framework framed male sexuality as inherently suspect and portrayed men broadly as potential aggressors. The focus on consent addressed an important issue. However, the discussion often became one-sided. Little attention was given to false accusations, due process, or the social consequences for men whose sexuality was assertive but consensual. Aggression, confidence, and pursuit were increasingly conflated with harm. Within this framework, male heterosexual desire itself was frequently characterized as oppressive. Ordinary expressions of attraction were reinterpreted through a moral lens that assumed imbalance and intent rather than context and consent. As a result, rape culture became less a tool for preventing sexual assault and more a mechanism for regulating male behavior. Public discourse increasingly relied on shame, fear, and moral accusation rather than clear standards and mutual responsibility. The effect was to widen distrust between the sexes rather than reduce harm. For many men, this created a narrowing field of acceptable behavior. Divorce risk, social condemnation of male sexuality, restrictions on sexual expression, and the ever-present fear of accusation combined to produce paralysis rather than healthy restraint. The outcome was not improved cooperation, but disengagement. Male sexuality was discouraged without providing a viable alternative framework for expression, leaving confusion, withdrawal, and resentment in its place. Understanding this dynamic requires separating genuine concern for safety from ideological overreach. When critique becomes absolute, it ceases to correct behavior and instead distorts it. The blue pill response. As third-wave feminism increasingly reframed male sexuality as problematic, one common male response was accommodation. Rather than resisting the narrative, some men chose cooperation. They attempted to align themselves with the new ideological expectations placed on male behavior. This approach became known as the blue pill. Blue pill men emphasized non-aggression, emotional accommodation, and conflict avoidance. They leaned heavily into beta traits designed to build comfort, security, and reassurance. In relationships, they pursued egalitarian ideals and worked diligently to please their partners, often prioritizing harmony over polarity. In theory, this strategy promised acceptance and stability. In practice, it produced disappointing outcomes. Despite feminist rhetoric praising cooperation and sensitivity, men who fully adopted this posture were often neither desired nor respected. As appeasement increased, attraction frequently declined. Public approval did not translate into private satisfaction. The result was another wave of relational breakdown. Marriages dissolved, resentment accumulated, and families fractured. Children were left navigating confusion rather than stability. As a mating strategy, the blue pill approach failed to align stated preferences with observed behavior. Even prominent male advocates within feminist circles eventually expressed frustration at the disconnect between what was verbally endorsed and what was actually chosen. The lesson was not ideological, but empirical. What people say they want does not always match how attraction operates in reality. Understanding this gap became a turning point. It forced many men to reassess cooperation without leverage and to question strategies built on approval rather than results. Feminism as a mating strategy. Feminism can also be understood as a mating strategy operating within the sexual marketplace. By challenging traditional feminine values such as attractiveness and beauty, and elevating masculine-coded traits like achievement and income, it attempted to reshape mate selection incentives. In doing so, feminism sought to pressure men into commitment arrangements that did not always align with their interests, while reducing the perceived importance of male commitment itself. The intended outcome was broader access to high-status men across the SMP. In practice, the highest-value men often refused commitment altogether. With increased options and reduced constraints, they avoided marriage and instead pursued multiple short-term relationships. Because male sexual value tends to increase with age, while female value is more time-sensitive, these men had little incentive to settle. Meanwhile, lower-status men were encouraged into provider roles that frequently lacked attraction and stability. Many of these unions later collapsed under hypergamous pressure. The benefits concentrated at the top, leaving many dissatisfied or excluded. Viewed strictly as a mating strategy, feminism failed to produce stable or widely favorable outcomes. Divorce as an undesirable outcome. The combination of widespread birth control and liberalized divorce laws has significantly altered mating dynamics. These changes made hypergamous behavior easier to act upon and harder to restrain. Women now initiate the majority of divorce proceedings, while male earning power has stagnated or declined relative to previous generations. As a result, fathers are no longer viewed as economically essential to child rearing. The traditional family unit weakened, and divorce became increasingly normalized. Millions of children now grow up in fractured households, while cultural narratives attempt to frame these outcomes as neutral or even healthy. The data tells a different story. Children raised in two-parent households consistently outperform those from single-parent homes across multiple measures. Children of divorce are also more likely to divorce themselves, repeating the pattern. Marriage has shifted from a permanent institution to a conditional arrangement. For the first time in human history, marriages are more likely to end in divorce than in death. This change has reshaped social structures more profoundly than many technological or medical advances. For men, divorce represents a high-cost outcome with long-term consequences. It is not a neutral event. It is an undesirable one. The Internet and pornography. While third-wave feminism dominated cultural discourse for decades, technological change introduced an unexpected outlet for many men. The rise of the Internet provided widespread access to pornography, which became an alternative to traditional relationships for a growing number of men. Pornography has long been an expression of male sexuality. With online access, its availability expanded rapidly. Within a single generation, many men began substituting sexual release through pornography for commitment, partnership, and family formation. Rather than adapting to the new mating environment, they withdrew from it. Feminist criticism of pornography intensified in response. Porn was framed as inherently exploitative and frequently linked to narratives of sexual harm, regardless of consent or content. At the same time, male disengagement increased. This withdrawal had secondary effects. As men became less emotionally and sexually invested, marriage rates continued to fall, and the age of first marriage rose. For the first time, some feminist voices began questioning whether career-focused independence alone produced long-term satisfaction. More significantly, the Internet enabled men to communicate with one another. Forums and online communities allowed dissatisfaction with modern mating dynamics to be openly discussed. Ideas were exchanged, patterns identified, and strategies developed. Out of this environment, the manosphere emerged. The red pill. The term red pill is taken from the science fiction film The Matrix. In the movie, the red pill represents a choice to see reality as it is, rather than accepting a comforting illusion. This metaphor is used to describe a similar shift in how sex, love, and relationships are understood. The blue pill reflects how relationships are commonly taught to function, even when lived experience repeatedly contradicts those teachings. The red pill represents how these dynamics actually operate, stripped of ideology, myth, and idealized narratives. Concepts such as true love and modern feminist doctrine fit within the blue pill framework. They prioritize intention, morality, or belief over observable outcomes. The red pill is not a political position or a belief system. It is a praxeology, a practical framework based on cause and effect. It focuses on skills, behavior, and understanding human mating as it functions in reality. Its purpose is simple: to help men make informed choices about sex, relationships, and reproduction with their own long-term interests in mind. The red pill is concerned only with what works. The red pill and mating. Mating occupies a central place in the lives of many men. Some aspire to marriage and fatherhood. Others pursue sex for pleasure, connection, or experience. In either case, blue pill ideologies have complicated the process of forming sexual relationships, whether short-term or long-term. Common advice such as be yourself or act natural often produces repeated rejection rather than success. Under the blue pill framework, men are expected to wait, hope, and react. Sexual access becomes something granted or withheld, leaving men largely dependent on female choice without leverage or understanding. Men who did not naturally fall into the small percentage of males most women immediately select were forced to adapt. Rather than accept chronic failure, red pill men began studying attraction systematically. Through online discussion and shared experimentation, they analyzed patterns in female sexuality, evolutionary biology, and psychology. Their goal was not ideology, but results. Out of this process emerged a practical framework known as GAME. GAME is the applied praxeology of the red pill. It is built on observation, testing, and refinement. It replaces passivity with strategy and replaces guesswork with skill. And it proved effective because GAME works. The red pill, actions, not words. Under the blue pill framework, men approach courtship cautiously. They advance tentatively, constantly monitoring for disapproval and attempt to conform to what they believe women say they want. In practice, this approach often fails. Expectations go unmet, attraction fades, and relationships become strained or collapse altogether. The red pill takes a different approach. Rather than prioritizing stated preferences, it emphasizes observed behavior. While many women claim to desire sensitivity, passivity, and non-aggression, dating patterns frequently reveal attraction to confidence, dominance, and traditionally alpha behaviors. What is said and what is chosen are often not the same. For this reason, the red pill prioritizes actions over words. When forming mating and reproductive strategies, paying attention to how women behave, who they choose, and what they respond to has proven far more reliable than accepting verbal claims at face value. Outcomes reveal truth more consistently than intention. Once a man consciously adjusts his strategy to align with observable reality rather than ideology, he is said to have taken the red pill. Focus attention on what women do rather than what they say. Game. Game is a collection of principles, skills, and practical rules that guide a man toward eliciting positive sexual responses from women. It applies across the entire interaction, from initial attraction to sustaining a sexual relationship. At its core, game teaches men how to project sexually attractive alpha behavior regardless of their baseline status. It involves understanding recurring patterns in female psychology and responding to them effectively in pursuit of sexual success. Game is commonly divided into two forms. Single game, also called basic game, focuses on attraction and acquisition. Relationship game, often referred to as married game, applies these principles within established relationships. Both aim at maintaining a functional and satisfying sexual dynamic. In each case, the man adopts a dominant frame, grounded in awareness and behavioral control. Success depends heavily on observation, calibration, and an accurate reading of female sexual behavior. Game is outcome-oriented. It is meant to produce results. Learn it carefully, practice it consistently, understand it fully.